Yeah, President Donald Trump's first few days in office sparked global shock and outrage following the signing of several of these executive orders. The one that sparked the most outcry at the weekend was the suspension of refugee arrivals and barring visas for travellers from several Muslim-majority countries. However, Israeli ministers have so far kept quiet over these drastic changes. Trump believes he has the best interests of Americans at heart. However, many say that these political moves are fueling anger and hate and may even cause severe conflict. Now, to talk to us about this from the Middle Eastern perspective, joining us in studio is the senior researcher at the Afro Middle East Centre, Ebrahim Deen. Very good morning to you, Ebrahim. Thanks for being with us again.
Good morning, Ebrahim. Thanks for having me.
Ebrahim, I want to take you back to the beginning of the show quickly. We had the Israeli ambassador here, and despite all the pronouncements we've seen in the last week or so, the building on disputed land, settlements, the moving of the embassy to Tel Aviv and the like, he says the intention of the Israeli state is peaceful and to be at peace with its neighbors. How do we view that then today?
I mean, I listened into the interview, and just like you, I was quite surprised. You know, we're seeing an intention to expand settlements. We're seeing Israel's, criticism of the UN resolution. We've seen Israeli criticism of the Kerry initiative, which still looks at this two-state solution. And then we talk about peace. You know, I mean, Jerusalem, for example, is a contested area. Under the UN mandate plan, it was supposed to be an international city. And even in a two-state solution, the east of the city, or as envisaged nowadays, the east of the city is supposed to be Palestinian, the west of the city, Israeli. And that's why, most embassies or most countries have their embassies in Tel Aviv, because, it's still contested. Israel sees it as their capital, but it's a very disputed capital. That's not in any way to say there's no link, Jewish links and religious links, but we currently working in a system where it's an international state. It's, and in terms of interstate relations, it's a very contested issue. And I mean, and this move, or at least, the Israeli support for this move actually shows or signals Israel's moving away from a two-state solution, because without Jerusalem, or East Jerusalem, there is no two states. I mean, there is, a really very rare chance of a two-state solution anyway because of the settlements in the West Bank. But without the capital and without this, any territorial control or any territorial claims on East Jerusalem, the Palestinian leadership would be seen already. They're very compromised. They'd just be seen as total sellouts, and no solution that they negotiate would ever be implementable.
The latest moves, these pronouncements around Jerusalem, the settlement, is there a mood amongst Muslim countries that this is a moment in history where they have to unite, or is that still far down the road?
I mean, I think the Middle East at the moment, the major powers actually are fighting amongst each other, and has always been fighting amongst each other. So we have, the Iranians and the Saudis in this battle for regional hegemony. The Iranians having very little ties with Israel. The Saudis actually having very strong covert ties with Israel. So Israel is no longer seen as a big issue by the leaderships of these states. However, in saying so, one of the key reasons for the existence of militant Islamists such as ISIS, such as Al-Qaeda, is this continued occupation. And the fact that many say that we can't actually trust these, these leaders of these countries because they so compromised. And so, while at a interstate level, we're not going to see much. I mean, yes, the PLO has threatened to, or the PA has threatened to pull out from the Oslo Agreement, but the PA itself receives much of its funding from the US and the EU and Israel. And so, it's very likely that it wouldn't. There's too much patronage networks that would be dismantled for this to happen. And so while that is the case, we will see an increase in, in the ability for groups like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, to recruit Middle Eastern citizens if this move happens. And I mean, at the moment, there's intentions of it happening. We wait to see whether or not it will happen. Because if this happens, it does then spell, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most, even mainstream pro-Israeli commentators, basically spend an end to the two-state solution, or the idea of a two-state solution.
I want to ask you, we've been running a poll yesterday. And we asked our viewers this question: is Donald Trump making the world a more dangerous place? Now, if we look at the 266 votes that were cast, 76% of our viewers are saying yes, 3/4 are saying they believe the world is becoming more dangerous. What is your considered view on this?
I mean, I think, when looking at US foreign policy, we need to look at the constraints on power. The fact that, for example, any war declarative order needs to first pass by Congress. For 90 days, it's allowed, but after that, or for an extension of that, it needs to be ratified by Congress. Donald Trump is not this guy who has all power and ultimate power. The power can be constrained. The question is whether or not it will be constrained. But in saying so, we're seeing these executive orders. We see this ban on 7 majority Muslim countries, and we see his intentions to build a wall on the Mexican border. His intention to move embassies to Jerusalem. His intentions, in Africa, for example, the whole trade issues in AGOA. Also, he's pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. Yeah. So we're seeing this increased nationalism and fascism in the US. And this is actually making the world more dangerous, because one is if continued, it may promote conflict, interstate conflict. So your US-China relations may be severely may be severely affected. But also, the ban on this Muslim majority countries, and many officials actually say that this will be extended, or it's their intention to extend this ban. And so this actually, ISIS's main recruitment tool is this clash of civilizations. The fact that, Muslims should believe that, the nations don't really protect him, that there'll always be second-class citizens in these nations. And this ban plays into that. It plays into this idea that there's wars based on civilizations, and so in that fact, it makes the world a more dangerous place. And also, we just have to look at the statistics, which is quite surprising. The U.S., as the gentleman from Geneva stated, has admitted 3.5 million refugees since 1975. Of these, 20 have carried out terrorist attacks, and this prior to September 2001. So your chances of being killed by a refugee is 1 in 3 million. Yes. Whereas your chances of being killed in gun violence is probably 1 in 5 to 1 in 10,000 in the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're seeing this move with this fascism and this otherism, which can only be bad for stability, for safety, and also for the cause of trying to create a world that is cosmopolitan, that allows for differences and actually respects and values differences.
Yeah, the world certainly thought that it's moved past walls of us.
Now, certainly, Mr. Deen, now we had the ambassador early on that says that perhaps the issue is that this is the capital of Israel, that is Jerusalem, and that's why the move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But can you give us perhaps an historical overview in terms of the situation and why this move would be so significant?
I think, and as the ambassador stated, there is Jewish linkages, as religious Jewish linkages to sites or holy sites in Jerusalem. But Zionism as an ideology is a political ideology, only started in the late 19th, early 20th century. So that's a political movement. What happened then, prior to the 1940s, is we saw the UN we saw the UN declare, the UN plan on Israel-Palestine, which divided the territory. Yes, we can argue it divided it not proportionally, in that the population or the nationality, if you want to call it, that had the most population got the least the least territory. So Palestinians got 45%, whilst Israel had 55%. But even under this plan, Jerusalem was supposed to be a city that was controlled by the international community, a UN-sanctioned city. What happened then following the 1967 war, when Israel took control or defeated many of the Arab armies and took control of East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, we saw this idea, UN Resolution 242, this idea of a two-state solution. But under this two-state solution, Jerusalem was supposed to be divided into a Palestinian sphere and an Israeli sphere. So, that's why the capital itself is contested. Israel sees Jerusalem as its eternal capital, the whole of Jerusalem, not just West Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem. And so, in doing so, basically the Trump administration then gives this idea that it also sanctions this move, which further impedes the ability of the international community and the US specifically to actually negotiate a solution to the issue, which would allow for, I personally I'm a fan of the one-state solution, like in South Africa, but which would allow for, two states living side by side.
Ebrahim, we've got 45 seconds to tell us what's been happening the last week. Are we seeing a Middle East that's coming closer to war because of these pronouncements?
I think it's these pronouncements have had very little effect on Middle Eastern politics in terms of the major interstate politics. I think the bigger issues in the Middle East right now is the Syrian conflict and the Syrian ceasefire, and how this plays out between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Those are the bigger issues. I think in terms of security, in terms of stability, in terms of negotiate, the longer term, this issues here would have an impact. But in the short term, or at the moment, the Middle East has bigger issues, or at least Middle East leaders have bigger issues to deal with, or that they're dealing with.
Ebrahim, thank you for joining us from the Middle East and the Afro Middle Eastern Centre here in Johannesburg. Ebrahim Deen is a senior researcher talking about, the world in the Trump presidency. Of course, we've